Ladies and gentlemen, today we delve into one of the most harrowing realities of America's criminal justice system, the way gangs exert control inside Rikers Island, one of the country's most notorious jail complexes. Rikers Island is not just a detention center. It is a microcosm of the broader social problems facing our cities. When individuals enter its walls, often awaiting trial and presumed innocent, they step into an ecosystem dominated not by the rule of law, but by a hierarchy shaped by violence, gangs, and survival. Within these concrete confines, organized groups, such as the Bloods, Latin Kings, and Trinitarios wield influence that affects every aspect of life, from who gets food first to who lives or dies. One of the most critical reasons gangs are able to control Rikers Island is the existence of a deep and persistent power vacuum within the jail itself. This vacuum is created when formal authority, meant to be exercised by correctional officers, administrators, and institutional rules, fails to function effectively or consistently. Chronic understaffing, high officer absenteeism, poor training, and weak oversight leave many housing units without adequate supervision for long periods of time. In these moments, control does not disappear. Instead, it shifts into the hands of those willing and able to assert dominance through intimidation and violence. Gangs step into this void by establishing their own systems of order, discipline, and governance. Senior gang members, or shot callers, assume leadership roles, deciding who is protected, who is targeted, and who is allowed access to basic necessities such as food, phones, showers, or recreation time. New inmates, especially younger or non-affiliated detainees, are often forced to align with a gang for survival. Refusal to do so can result in beatings, extortion, sexual assault, or constant harassment, making gang affiliation less a choice and more a necessity. This informal gang governance operates through fear and loyalty rather than law. Rules are enforced through collective punishment, where entire groups may be attacked if one person disobeys. Disputes between inmates are rarely resolved through official channels because reporting violence to staff can label someone as a snitch, placing them at even greater risk. As a result, gangs become the primary authority figures inmates recognize, overshadowing the legal and correctional structures meant to maintain order. The power vacuum is further reinforced when correctional officers, overwhelmed by unsafe working conditions, unofficially rely on gangs to keep a semblance of control. In some cases, officers may ignore gang activity as long as it prevents larger disturbances, effectively legitimizing gang authority. Over time, this dynamic transforms the jail into an environment where the strongest groups rule, institutional control erodes, and violence becomes a normalized tool of governance. Rikers Island is not only a jail, but also an extension of the street gang landscape found throughout New York City. Major gangs such as the Bloods, Crips, Latin Kings, Trinitarios, Nidus, and MS-13 maintain a strong and organized presence inside the facility, often mirroring the same structures, ranks, and rivalries that exist on the outside. For many inmates, incarceration does not disrupt gang affiliation. Instead, it deepens it. Rikers becomes a meeting ground where gang identities are reinforced, alliances are tested, and conflicts are intensified. These gangs do not operate randomly. They function with hierarchy and discipline, with leaders who issue orders and younger members expected to obey. High-ranking members often coordinate activities across housing units, using messengers, coded language, or contraband cell phones to communicate. Orders may include organizing assaults, enforcing discipline within the gang, collecting debts, or targeting rival groups. This level of organization allows gangs to act quickly and decisively, often faster than jail authorities can respond. Gang membership also provides inmates with a sense of protection and belonging in an otherwise hostile environment. Many detainees entering Rikers for the first time quickly learn that being unaffiliated can make them vulnerable. As a result, some inmates join gangs inside the jail, even if they were not members on the outside, simply to avoid being victimized. This constant recruitment strengthens gang numbers and influence, allowing them to dominate entire dorms or cell blocks. Rivalries between gangs play a major role in shaping violence inside Rikers. Long-standing street conflicts are carried into the jail, where proximity and overcrowding increase the likelihood of violent encounters. Fights and assaults are often retaliatory, escalating cycles of violence that spread across multiple units. These conflicts can be sparked by minor incidents, but quickly grow into organized attacks involving multiple gang members. The persistence of these gangs inside Rikers demonstrates how incarceration alone fails to disrupt criminal networks. Instead of dismantling gang structures, the jail environment often consolidates them, giving gangs a captive population, limited oversight, and constant opportunities to assert dominance. Inside Rikers Island, gang control extends far beyond acts of violence. It reaches into the everyday routines and basic survival of inmates. In many housing units, gangs decide how daily life functions, effectively replacing official jail procedures with their own informal systems of control. Simple activities that should be guaranteed, such as using the phone, accessing commissary items, showering, or even choosing where to sit or sleep, often depend on gang permission. This level of influence turns ordinary moments into constant negotiations for safety. Gangs frequently control access to resources by monopolizing commissary goods and distributing them selectively. Items like food, hygiene products, and clothing become tools of power. Inmates may be forced to give up their commissary in exchange for protection or to settle debts, while others are denied access entirely as punishment. Those who cannot pay may be coerced into acting as lookouts, carrying contraband, or participating in violent acts on behalf of the gang. Daily movement within housing units is also shaped by gang authority. Certain areas may be claimed by specific groups, making them off-limits to rivals or unaffiliated inmates. Even walking across a dorm or sitting at the wrong table can provoke an assault. Gangs enforce unwritten rules about eye contact, language, and behavior, and violations are often met with immediate violence. This creates an atmosphere where fear dictates behavior and inmates are constantly on edge. Communication with the outside world is another area heavily influenced by gangs. Phone access may be restricted or sold, forcing inmates to pay or perform favors to make calls. In some cases, gangs use phone privileges to conduct criminal activity beyond the jail, including coordinating drug sales or intimidation. Control over communication further strengthens their power and isolates vulnerable inmates. For many detainees, survival at Rikers depends on understanding and complying with gang rules rather than institutional ones. The official authority of the jail becomes secondary to the reality enforced by gangs, leaving inmates trapped in a system where daily life is governed by intimidation, exploitation, and the constant threat of violence. Violence at Rikers Island is not random or spontaneous. In many cases, it is systematic, organized, and directly linked to gang leadership. Gangs use violence as a primary tool to assert dominance, enforce rules, and maintain control over inmates and territory. Organized fights are often planned in advance, with specific targets chosen to send a message to rivals, punish disobedience, or demonstrate power within a housing unit. These acts of violence are calculated, not impulsive, and serve a strategic purpose within the gang hierarchy. Gang leaders frequently order assaults to maintain discipline among their own members. If a member fails to follow instructions, shows weakness, or disrespects leadership, they may be beaten as a form of internal punishment. This reinforces obedience and prevents dissent. At the same time, violence against rival gangs is used to protect territory, retaliate for past incidents, or gain control of shared spaces. These confrontations often escalate quickly, drawing in multiple participants and resulting in severe injuries. Organized fights are sometimes timed to take advantage of staffing shortages or shift changes when supervision is weakest. In some housing units, inmates are deliberately released from cells or gathered in common areas where fights can erupt. Gangs may assign roles during these attacks, including attackers, lookouts, and individuals responsible for hiding weapons afterward. The coordination involved mirrors street-level gang operations, showing how deeply entrenched these structures are inside the jail. Weapons used in these assaults are often improvised, made from everyday items such as toothbrushes, metal fragments, or broken furniture. The presence of these weapons increases the severity of injuries and contributes to a constant atmosphere of fear. Victims of gang violence are frequently reluctant to report attacks, knowing that cooperation with authorities can lead to further retaliation. The normalization of organized violence inside Rikers reinforces gang authority and undermines institutional control. When gangs can openly orchestrate fights with minimal consequences, it signals to inmates that real power lies not with the jail administration, but with those who are willing to use force to rule. Contraband is one of the most powerful tools gangs use to maintain influence and authority inside Rikers Island. Items that are prohibited or restricted, such as drugs, weapons, cell phones, cigarettes, and extra food, become valuable commodities in an environment where inmates have limited access to resources. Gangs organize and dominate the distribution of these items, turning contraband into an underground economy that strengthens their power and rewards loyalty. Gang-controlled contraband networks operate with structure and coordination. Certain members are responsible for storage, others for distribution, and some for collecting payment or enforcing debts. Payments may come in the form of commissary items, favors, protection, or forced participation in violent acts. Inmates who fall into debt are often threatened or assaulted until they comply, creating cycles of exploitation that trap vulnerable individuals. Cell phones, in particular, are among the most valuable forms of contraband. Gangs use them not only to communicate within the jail, but also to maintain connections with the outside world. Through these devices, gang leaders can coordinate criminal activity, intimidate witnesses, manage street operations, and recruit new members. Control over communication allows gangs to extend their influence beyond the jail walls, blurring the line between incarceration and street crime. Drugs such as marijuana, synthetic substances, and prescription medications also circulate through gang-run channels. These substances contribute to addiction, violence, and instability within housing units. Intoxicated inmates are more likely to become victims of assault or to act unpredictably, which further destabilizes the environment and makes it easier for gangs to assert dominance. The presence of widespread contraband highlights failures in security and oversight, but it also shows how gangs exploit institutional weaknesses for profit and power. By controlling what others want and need, gangs create dependency, fear, and loyalty, reinforcing their authority in nearly every aspect of life inside Rikers Island. One of the most troubling aspects of gang dominance at Rikers Island is the role that some correction officers play, whether intentionally or through neglect, in allowing gangs to maintain power. Faced with extreme understaffing, dangerous working conditions, and overcrowded housing units, certain officers resort to informal arrangements with gang leaders to keep order. Rather than enforcing official rules, they may allow gangs to police inmates themselves, believing this reduces chaos and personal risk. In these situations, gang leaders become intermediaries between inmates and staff. Officers may rely on them to calm tensions, prevent large-scale disturbances, or manage daily routines. In exchange, gangs are often granted privileges such as extended out-of-cell time, access to certain areas, or the ability to move freely within housing units. This dynamic reinforces gang authority and sends a clear message to inmates about who truly holds power. In more severe cases, cooperation crosses into corruption. Some officers have been accused of smuggling contraband, including drugs, phones, and weapons, into the facility in exchange for money or favors. This not only fuels gang-run economies, but also directly contributes to violence and instability. When gangs know they can rely on certain staff members to look the other way, their operations become bolder and more organized. Even when officers are not actively corrupt, consistent inaction can have the same effect. Ignoring assaults, delaying responses to emergencies, or failing to separate rival gang members allows violence to flourish. Inmates quickly learn that reporting incidents may be pointless or dangerous, further solidifying gangs as the primary authority. The fear of retaliation discourages cooperation with staff and isolates victims. This breakdown in trust between inmates and correctional officers erodes the legitimacy of the institution. When gangs are seen as more reliable or powerful than official authority, the jail's ability to enforce safety, accountability, and justice collapses, allowing gang influence to become deeply entrenched throughout Rikers Island. Gang influence at Rikers Island significantly amplifies the level and frequency of violence within the facility, creating an environment where fear becomes a constant part of daily life. Because gangs rely on intimidation and force to maintain dominance, violence is not just a reaction to conflict, but a deliberate strategy. Assaults are used to establish reputations, punish defiance, and deter challenges from rivals or unaffiliated inmates. This makes violence a routine and expected aspect of incarceration rather than an exception. The presence of multiple rival gangs within confined and overcrowded spaces increases tension and volatility. Minor incidents, such as accidental contact, verbal disputes, or perceived disrespect, can quickly escalate into serious attacks involving multiple inmates. These incidents often spread beyond the original participants, drawing in others who feel obligated to defend their gang status. As a result, entire housing units can become unstable with little warning. Fear affects how inmates think, act, and interact with others. Many live in a constant state of hypervigilance, carefully monitoring their behavior to avoid drawing attention. Sleep is often disrupted due to noise, threats, or sudden outbreaks of violence. This psychological stress can lead to anxiety, depression, and trauma, especially for younger detainees or those incarcerated for the first time. Gang-driven violence also discourages inmates from seeking help or protection from authorities. Reporting an assault or requesting separation from a gang can be interpreted as betrayal, placing the individual at even greater risk. As silence becomes a survival strategy, gangs operate with fewer consequences and cycles of retaliation continue unchecked. This climate of fear affects not only inmates, but also staff, who may feel unsafe entering certain areas or intervening in conflicts. The pervasive threat of violence reinforces gang control, weakens institutional authority, and perpetuates an environment where fear dictates behavior and power is maintained through intimidation. Gang dominance at Rikers Island is deeply rooted in systemic institutional failures that create conditions where gangs can thrive. Chronic understaffing is one of the most significant problems. With too few correctional officers to adequately supervise housing units, large sections of the jail are left effectively unmonitored for extended periods. This lack of presence allows gangs to organize, recruit, and enforce their own rules without immediate interference, making official authority largely symbolic. Overcrowding further compounds the issue. Housing units designed for far fewer inmates are often packed beyond capacity, increasing tension and reducing the ability to separate rival gang members or protect vulnerable individuals. In these cramped conditions, conflicts become inevitable, and gangs exploit the chaos to strengthen their influence. Overcrowding also limits access to programs, recreation, and mental health services, leaving inmates idle and frustrated, conditions that gangs use to recruit and control. Weak oversight and accountability mechanisms allow abusive practices and neglect to persist. When incidents of violence are not properly investigated or addressed, gangs learn that consequences are minimal or inconsistent. This fosters a sense of impunity, where gang leaders feel emboldened to operate openly. At the same time, inmates lose trust in the system's ability to protect them, further shifting loyalty and reliance toward gangs. The lack of effective rehabilitation and educational programs also plays a critical role. Without constructive activities, job training, or counseling, Inmates have limited opportunities for personal growth or positive identity formation. Gangs step in to fill this void, offering structure, belonging, and a sense of purpose, even if it is rooted in violence and exploitation. Together, these institutional weaknesses create an environment where gang control is not an anomaly, but an expected outcome. The failure to address staffing, oversight, overcrowding, and rehabilitation ensures that gangs remain deeply embedded in the daily operations of Rikers Island. Documentaries and investigative journalism have played a crucial role in revealing the human cost of gang dominance inside Rikers Island. Through first-hand accounts, leaked footage, and interviews with former inmates, correctional staff, and families, these reports bring visibility to experiences that are often hidden behind prison walls. They show that gang control is not an abstract problem, but a daily reality that deeply affects the physical and emotional well-being of those incarcerated. Many documentaries highlight the stories of young detainees who enter Rikers while awaiting trial and are immediately exposed to violence, coercion, and intimidation. These individuals, many of whom have not been convicted of a crime, describe being pressured to join gangs for protection and being assaulted for refusing. The trauma experienced in these early days often leaves lasting psychological scars, including post-traumatic stress, anxiety, and distrust of authority. Investigative reports also shed light on the suffering of families who watch loved ones deteriorate while incarcerated. Parents and relatives recount receiving alarming phone calls describing assaults, extortion, or threats, often with little response from jail officials. In some cases, deaths in custody have drawn national attention, revealing patterns of neglect, delayed medical care, and ignored warning signs. These tragedies underscore the severe consequences of allowing gang violence to flourish unchecked. Footage captured inside Rikers, sometimes by officers themselves, has shown organized fights, chaotic housing units, and staff struggling to maintain control. Such visual evidence challenges official narratives and exposes the gap between policy and reality. It forces the public to confront uncomfortable truths about how systemic failures and gang influence intersect to create inhumane conditions. By documenting these realities, films and investigative reports give voice to those most affected and highlight the emotional, psychological, and physical toll of a system where gangs wield power over vulnerable individuals. Addressing the pervasive influence of gangs inside Rikers Island cannot be achieved through isolated measures or short-term interventions. It requires comprehensive and systemic reform. The entrenchment of gang power is a symptom of multiple, interconnected failures in staffing, oversight, rehabilitation, and facility management. Without tackling these underlying issues, any attempt to reduce violence or assert institutional authority is likely to be temporary or superficial. One essential component of reform is increasing staffing levels and improving training for correctional officers. Officers must be equipped not only to respond to incidents of violence, but also to recognize early signs of gang organization and tension. Proper staffing ensures that housing units are consistently monitored, reducing opportunities for gangs to operate unchecked. Training in de-escalation, crisis management, and cultural competency can help officers manage conflicts without resorting to force while maintaining credibility and authority. Reforming the physical environment of the jail is equally critical. Overcrowding has long fueled tension and facilitated gang control. Reducing inmate populations through alternative sentencing, pretrial diversion programs, and early release for nonviolent offenders can help create safer, more manageable housing conditions. Smaller units allow for better supervision and provide staff with more control over inmate movement and interactions, limiting opportunities for organized violence. Another key aspect is restoring oversight and accountability. Independent monitoring bodies, transparent reporting, and consistent enforcement of rules are necessary to prevent both inmate abuse and staff complicity. Gangs thrive in conditions of impunity. Ensuring that violations are investigated and punished reinforces the authority of the institution and restores some degree of fairness and safety. Finally, Reform must address the social and psychological needs of inmates. Providing access to educational programs, vocational training, mental health care, and substance abuse treatment reduces idleness and frustration, weakening the appeal of gangs. Rehabilitation initiatives offer alternative pathways for personal growth, fostering resilience and critical thinking that can help inmates resist gang pressure and prepare for life beyond incarceration. In conclusion, the story of Rikers Island is not just about crime or punishment. It is about how systemic failures allow violence and fear to dominate the lives of those within its walls. Gangs thrive where institutions falter, turning a place meant for justice and rehabilitation into one ruled by intimidation and survival. To change this reality, we must demand comprehensive reform, better staffing, effective oversight, humane conditions, and meaningful programs that give inmates hope and purpose. Only by addressing the root causes of gang control can Rikers become a facility where safety, fairness, and the possibility of redemption are more than just ideals. They're lived realities. The challenge is immense, but the cost of inaction is far greater. The continued suffering of vulnerable individuals, the perpetuation of violence, and the erosion of public trust in a system meant to serve justice. Rikers Island can and must be transformed, not by ignoring the problem, but by confronting it with courage, accountability, and a commitment to humanity.